The period of Jesus of Nazareth's life spent in his hometown, extending from his return after infancy until the commencement of his public ministry, approximately 4 BCE to 28 CE, is often referred to as the silent years or unknown years. The canonical Gospels provide sparse detail regarding this era, obliging historical analysis to rely heavily on archaeological evidence and socio-economic reconstruction to contextualize the life of a first-century Galilean Jewish craftsman. The geographical and historical context of Nazareth in the 1st century CE. To understand the formative environment of Jesus, it is necessary to first establish the political and physical reality of Galilee and the specific village of Nazareth during the early Roman period. Galilee, during Jesus' lifetime, was administered by the ethnarch Herod Antipas, who ruled from 4 BCE until 39 CE. While Antipas technically governed a client state, his territory operated profoundly under the authority and influence of the vast Roman Empire. This geopolitical context was critical, generating significant economic and social tension within Jewish society. The administration of Herod Antipas was characterized by major, ambitious building projects, most notably the renovation and expansion of Sepphoris and the foundation of Tiberias. These infrastructural investments required heavy taxation, which inevitably placed significant economic burdens on the rural peasantry. This continuous economic strain and the presence of Roman power formed the background for Jesus' upbringing and later contributed to the social critiques articulated in his public ministry. The centralization of wealth and power, evident in the lavish mansions of the elite in Jerusalem, was a condition that Jesus later strongly opposed in 1st century Palestine. Nazareth was definitively not an urban center or a major administrative city. Historical and archaeological evidence consistently describes it as a small, unassuming Jewish village located in the hills of Lower Galilee. Population estimates suggest the village contained only a few dozen families, likely no more than several hundred inhabitants, with some assessments placing the population around 480 souls. The obscurity of Nazareth is well documented, lending credence to the historical skepticism reflected in the question, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" John chapter 1 verse 46. This lack of prominence reinforces its status as a simple peasant community. Recent, rigorous archaeological fieldwork has decisively addressed older skeptical views regarding the village's existence in the early 1st century. Excavations confirm that Nazareth was settled continuously from at least the late Hellenistic period onward, functioning as a Jewish community. Finds, including coins from the Hellenistic and early Roman periods and pottery shards discovered beneath the modern Basilica of the Annunciation, corroborate settlement during the time of Jesus. The structures unearthed in Nazareth paint a picture of modest, rural existence. Excavations, including a remarkably preserved 1st century courtyard house beneath the Sisters of Nazareth convent, reveal simple, one-story stone homes. These dwellings were constructed of stacked fieldstones bound with mortar, often sharing a common courtyard. Living conditions were humble, involving packed dirt floors, minimal personal space, and the use of simple reed mats for seating and sleeping. Crucially, archaeological finds demonstrate the strict Jewish identity of the inhabitants. Discoveries of chalk stone vessel shards and limestone vessels are highly significant. This evidence confirms that Jesus was raised in a highly pious, traditionally observant Jewish environment that adhered rigorously to purity laws and followed the Torah as a guide for daily life. The village economy was sustained by agriculture, evidenced by infrastructure such as olive presses and granaries. A critical factor in understanding the Tecton family's economic life is Nazareth's geographic proximity to Sepphoris, the Galilean capital. Sepphoris was located a bare 4 miles, 6.5 kilometers, northwest of Nazareth. Following its destruction in 4 BCE, Herod Antipas initiated massive rebuilding efforts, making it the ornament of Galilee. The large-scale, ongoing construction in Sepphoris would have offered necessary and stable employment for many years to skilled craftsmen in the region, including Joseph and Jesus. The walking commute between Nazareth and Sepphoris was approximately 50 minutes. The economic necessity of working in Sepphoris forced Jesus to navigate two radically distinct environments. Nazareth represented the isolated, pious, and agricultural village life. Sepphoris represented a cosmopolitan, Hellenistic-influenced center of commerce and Roman administration. The Galilean economy, thriving on regional interaction, required the Tecton family to seek work outside their small community. This dual exposure provided Jesus with a unique sociological viewpoint. He observed firsthand the urban sophistication, the presence of Roman power, and the aristocratic wealth being accumulated through regional projects. This contrast between the simple, communal life of Nazareth and the complex, imperial environment of Sepphoris profoundly shaped his later teachings, supplying the vocabulary and contextual understanding necessary for his economic and social parables and critiques. Point 4. The nature of Jesus's immediate family life and the shared profession he inherited from Joseph are vital for comprehending the social matrix of his youth. The canonical Gospels offer slightly varied accounts of the Holy Family's relocation to Nazareth, reflecting their distinct theological and structural priorities. The Gospel of Luke states clearly that after fulfilling the requirements of the law of the Lord, including the purification rites in Jerusalem, approximately 40 days after birth, Mary and Joseph returned immediately to Nazareth, which Luke identifies as their own town. Luke presents Nazareth as the family's unambiguous, original residence. The Gospel of Matthew, conversely, records the threat posed by Herod the Great and the subsequent flight to Egypt. After Herod's death, Joseph was warned not to return to Judea because Herod Archelaus ruled there, notorious for his cruelty. Instead, the family diverted to the relative safety of Galilee, settling in Nazareth. Matthew emphasizes this move as a fulfillment of prophecy. He shall be called a Nazarene. While critics have occasionally cited these accounts as mutually exclusive regarding the timeline and the family's original residence, contemporary scholarship often views them as independent, selective accounts focusing on different aspects of the same journey. Luke on legal obedience and return, Matthew on political caution and prophetic fulfillment. The most definitive detail regarding Jesus's youth is his profession. The Gospels identify both Joseph and Jesus using the Greek noun tekton, tekton. The word tekton is a common term for an artisan or craftsman, derived from a Proto-Indo-European root signifying to carve or to mold. Point 2 traditionally translated as carpenter, a woodworker. The scope of this profession was far broader in the first-century Galilean context, encompassing a versatile tradesman who worked with hard materials. This role included woodwork, e.g., furniture, doors, tools, stonework, e.g., laying foundations, building walls, and general repairs, e.g., plow wheels. Jesus learned this trade through years of apprenticeship under Joseph, linking his earthly identity intimately with manual work. Nazareth was not located near large forests, and wood, while necessary for certain items and scaffolding, would have been a valuable, perhaps scarce, commodity. Conversely, archaeological evidence, including quarrying sites near Nazareth, suggests that stone was the primary building material for the region's modest houses. Therefore, the designation of tekton is better rendered as builder-craftsman. In a small village like Nazareth, which had a population too small to support multiple specialized tradesmen, economic survival required Joseph and Jesus to be versatile general contractors. Their capacity to handle stone masonry, along with woodworking, would have been indispensable, especially if they were employed in the massive construction efforts at nearby Sepphoris. The necessity for this generalized skill set demonstrates that the family, while possessing valuable artisan knowledge, was compelled by economic forces to seek work wherever building was required. The period of Jesus's life spent learning and laboring in Nazareth is characterized by an almost total absence of narrative detail in the canonical tradition, a silence that itself carries theological weight. The historical gap between Jesus's infancy narratives and the start of his ministry around age 30 is known as the silent years. The Gospels offer only 2 canonical reference points during this extended period. The first is Luke's concise summary describing Jesus's development. The child grew up and became strong. He was filled with wisdom, and God's favor was on him. This is later reinforced by the observation that he increased in wisdom and stature, and in favor with God and men. The profound silence regarding this period suggests that Jesus lived an ordinary, obedient, productive life centered on the demands of his family and manual work. This dedication to the Tecton profession for nearly 3 decades demonstrates the theological value placed on secular labor. The Son of God spent the majority of his life with dirt under his fingernails and sawdust in his hair. This ordinary experience of daily labor, responsibility, and potential drudgery was foundational to his human formation and his later teachings. The only specific canonical narrative from Jesus's youth is the account in Luke of his visit to the temple at age 12. This journey took place during the Feast of the Passover, a major pilgrimage festival. Upon their return journey to Galilee, Mary and Joseph realized Jesus was missing. After 3 days, they located him in the Jerusalem temple, sitting in the midst of the teachers, both listening to them and asking them questions. This episode underscores Jesus's precocious religious understanding and his emerging sense of divine vocation, famously articulated in his response to his worried parents. "Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" However, the narrative concludes with a definitive statement regarding his subordination to his earthly parents. "And he went down with them, and came to Nazareth, and was subject unto them." This emphasis on filial obedience confirmed that, despite his divine nature, Jesus lived under the authority and discipline of Joseph and Mary, accepting the expectations of the Nazarene household for the next 18 years. The lack of detail in the canonical Gospels inspired later, apocryphal texts that attempted to fill the historical gap with legendary narratives. The Infancy Gospel of Thomas, IGT, a 2nd century text, portrays Jesus's childhood in Nazareth through a series of dramatic, often disturbing, miracle stories. These stories include Jesus creating life from clay birds, cursing a boy to death for interfering with his play, and stretching wooden beams to aid Joseph's carpentry. Scholarly assessment views these non-canonical narratives as unreliable and often contradictory to the canonical character of Jesus. The IGT's sensationalism, presenting Jesus as a miracle-working child prodigy, fundamentally undermines the central premise of the canonical Gospels, that Jesus's identity was obscure and unexpected, which is essential for explaining the later rejection by his own townspeople. The IGT likely functioned as Christian missionary propaganda, seeking to impress Hellenistic audiences familiar with spectacular divine figures, in stark contrast to the quiet piety and historical realism implied by the canonical silence. The period of manual labor profoundly shaped the character and public image of Jesus. Working as a versatile builder-craftsman required practical skills, negotiation, precision, and physical stamina, all of which are observable virtues in his later ministry. This lengthy engagement with manual labor provided the authentic background necessary for the agrarian and building metaphors, e.g., the wise man building his house on rock, that permeate his teachings. The dedication to the Tecton trade also serves to legitimize and sanctify secular work, affirming its inherent value in God's creation, a concept sometimes obscured by later theological distinctions. However, this period also set the stage for profound familial tension. The prevailing expectation was that Jesus, as the eldest son, would fulfill his duties by continuing the family trade, marrying, and succeeding Joseph as the household patriarch. His decision, after 3 decades, to abandon this stable trade for an itinerant prophetic mission shattered these established expectations. This rupture contributed to the friction hinted at in later canonical accounts, such as when his family attempts to restrain him, believing him to be out of his mind. The years of filial obedience in Nazareth thus contrast sharply with the radical departure necessitated by his messianic vocation. The most detailed and dramatic account of Jesus' life in Nazareth occurs at the very end of the Silent Years, when he returns to the synagogue and confronts the expectations of his hometown. This event serves as the catalyst for his definitive departure. Jesus returned to Nazareth after establishing a reputation elsewhere in Galilee as a compelling preacher and healer. On the Sabbath, he was invited to participate in the synagogue service, a customary practice that allowed the townspeople to gauge the quality of the teacher he had become. Jesus read from the scroll of Isaiah chapter 61 verses 1-2, concerning the Spirit anointing him to preach good news, heal the brokenhearted, and announce the year of the Lord's favor. He then delivered the monumental declaration, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." The initial reaction of the townspeople was a mixture of admiration for his gracious words and profound, deep-seated skepticism. The core of their disbelief lay in the contempt of familiarity. They judged his prophetic authority based on their intimate knowledge of his humble origins. They questioned, "Is not this Joseph's son?" Luke chapter 4 verse 22, or, "Is not this the carpenter?" Mark chapter 6 verse 3. They could not reconcile the local tekton with the proclaimed Messiah, viewing his humble class and occupation as a barrier to true divine authority. It should be noted that the Synoptic Gospels place this rejection scene differently. Matthew and Mark place it midway through Jesus' ministry, noting that his unbelieving hometown limited the miracles he could perform. Luke, however, places the incident strategically at the very beginning of the ministry, functioning as a programmatic narrative to introduce the theme of prophetic rejection that would define his mission. In both accounts, the local unbelief was so pervasive that it actively resisted the manifestation of divine power. The confrontation escalated rapidly when Jesus addressed their unspoken demand for a miracle show. Jesus cited the proverb, "No prophet is accepted in his own hometown," and then issued a devastating critique by recalling historical precedents. The prophets Elijah and Elisha, who were sent to minister to outsiders, specifically, the Gentile widow of Zarephath and Naaman the Syrian. This comparison was highly offensive. In 1st-century Roman-occupied Galilee, Jewish nationalistic and anti-Gentile sentiment was strong, fueled by centuries of conflict and current Roman oppression. Suggesting that God's saving action bypassed the chosen people for non-Israelites was a profound theological and political provocation. Jesus was implicitly arguing that the Israelites of that era were unworthy of the miracles he performed elsewhere, and that God's favor was bestowed upon outsiders who demonstrated faith. The townspeople's expectations for a narrow, nationalistic Messiah were violently challenged by Jesus' universal interpretation of prophecy. The consequence, as recorded in Luke, was immediate and physical. The synagogue was filled with rage, and the residents drove Jesus out of the town, leading him to the brow of a hill with the intent of throwing him off a cliff. This violent rejection was rooted in spiritual blindness. Their pride and preconceived notions of the Messiah prevented them from recognizing the divine truth in their midst. The townspeople's intimate knowledge served as an insurmountable stumbling block, causing them to miss the blessings that faith could have brought. The rejection in Nazareth carries immense theological significance. By citing the prophets ministering to Gentiles, Jesus implicitly foreshadowed the future direction of his mission. The necessity of fleeing his own town because of their hostility marked a decisive pivot away from his immediate local community and anticipated the eventual turning of the gospel message toward others, outside of Israel, culminating in the later mission to the Gentiles. The story of Jesus in Nazareth, primarily a story of canonical silence, is reconstructed through the rigorous application of archaeology and textual criticism. The environment of Nazareth, a pious, agrarian Jewish village of modest means, closely linked economically to the rapidly modernizing, Hellenistic center of Sepphoris, served as the crucible for Jesus's human formation. His identity as a Tecton confirms that the historical Jesus was a working-class artisan, highly skilled but economically reliant on regional employment, often working with stone and wood in major construction projects. This experience provided the practical, rhetorical, and socio-economic grounding for his later ministry. The long period of manual labor underscores the theological significance of humility and obedience, counteracting the sensationalized portraits found in non-canonical accounts. Ultimately, the climactic rejection scene in the Nazareth synagogue serves as the necessary end point of this silent life. The townspeople's inability to accept that the Messiah could emerge from such humble, known origins, the local builder's son, forced Jesus's definitive departure. This event, underscored by his startling citation of Gentile beneficiaries of divine favor, pivots his mission from the restricted expectations of his hometown toward a universal message, foreshadowing the expansive scope of the gospel beyond the boundaries of first-century Galilee.